The river was the trap, and he was the master of the river. Imagine you are standing on the sun-baked, muddy bank of a colossal, sluggish river cutting across what would eventually become the Sahara Desert. The year is about 112 million years ago, the Early Cretaceous. It is blisteringly hot, humid, and every shadow hides something massive and hungry. You, a thirsty dino normie, approach the water for a quick sip. You're scanning the jungle edge for the telltale sign of a tyrannosaur descendant, or maybe a massive sauropod thundering by. You're looking up, because that's where the danger usually comes from. Big mistake. Huge. The thing that kills you doesn't come from the forest or the sky. It comes from below the waterline. It is a creature so gargantuan, so perfectly optimized for silent, explosive violence that it makes modern Nile crocodiles look like grumpy, slightly oversized house cats.
It is an absolute unit that grew up in an environment where even the fish were the size of refrigerators, and it evolved to eat literally anything stupid enough to wander within 10 feet of its jaws. This is the story of Sarcosuchus imperator, the emperor flesh crocodile. And if you think T-Rex was the apex predator of the Mesozoic, buckle up, Buttercup, because you are about to meet a 40-foot-long, 8-ton, scaly freight train that made T-Rex look like a relative newcomer. This thing was pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel, and it was older than most of the dinosaurs you actually learned about in school. The accepted narrative, the one drilled into every dino normie, is that the dinosaurs ruled unchallenged. But down in the massive, meandering river systems of ancient North Africa, there was an evolutionary lineage called the crocodiliferines that held a brutal, watery tyranny, and their king was Sarcosuchus.
To truly appreciate this monster, we have to travel back to the Albian age of the Early Cretaceous, specifically to the El Raz Formation, located in modern-day Niger. This was not the arid desert we know today. Forget sand dunes. Think of a vast, seasonally flooded tropical delta, a wetland ecosystem the size of several modern European countries, fed by massive, ancient rivers that carried sediment from distant mountains. The humidity was oppressive, the vegetation dense, and the waters were warm and murky. This environment provided two essential things for Sarcosuchus: an endless supply of large, slow-moving aquatic prey, and crucially, a constant parade of large, unsuspecting terrestrial prey who needed to drink. Let's talk scale, because this is where the mind breaks a little. When people imagine ancient crocodiles, they usually think of creatures maybe 15 to 20 feet long. Even the massive saltwater crocodiles of today, the biggest extant reptiles, max out around 20 feet and maybe a ton. Sarcosuchus imperator was estimated to be up to 40 feet long. That's longer than a standard school bus. Its weight estimates swing wildly based on the models used, from a conservative 5 tons, the weight of a fully loaded pickup truck, up to 8 or 10 metric tons. 10 tons is roughly the weight of 2 full-grown African bush elephants stacked on top of each other. Its head alone was 6 feet long. Let me repeat that. Its skull, nose to occipital crest, was the length of an average adult man. If you walked past its head lying on the ground, you would barely come up to its eye socket. The scientific journey to resurrecting this absolute unit is fascinating and involves decades of painstaking work in one of the world's most inhospitable regions.
The first fragmentary remains were discovered way back in the 1940s in the Sahara, but it was the French paleontologist Albert Félix de la Parente who gave it its name in 1966. However, these finds were tantalizingly incomplete. We had some massive jaws and some scutes, armor plates, but not enough to accurately piece together the whole picture. It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s that the real breakthroughs happened, led by the charismatic paleontologist Paul Sereno and his team. They mounted expeditions into the punishing Tenere Desert of Niger. I'm talking temperatures routinely hitting 120 degrees Fahrenheit, requiring massive logistical effort just to survive, let alone dig up 8 tons of fossilized reptile. Sereno's team unearthed multiple partial skeletons, including several near-complete skulls in the Gadufawa region. This is when the creature earned its deserved moniker, super-croc.
The condition of these fossils allowed researchers to finally move beyond guesswork. They could look at the growth rings in the massive osteoderms, the bony plates embedded in the skin, to estimate the creature's lifespan. A 2018 paleobiological study suggested that Sarcosuchus took maybe 50 to 60 years to reach its full, terrifying adult size. This longevity is crucial. It means this massive reptile spent half a century honing its predatory skills, growing into a truly unstoppable force. Now, let's get into the mechanics of pure destruction, the specialized anatomy that made Sarcosuchus the king of the Cretaceous rivers. The head, the bizarre bulb. Looking at the skull of Sarcosuchus, the first thing that strikes you, besides the size obviously, is the bizarre enlarged bulbous structure at the very tip of the snout.
This feature is called a bulla or narial bulla, and it sets Sarcosuchus apart from nearly every other giant crocodiliform, including its slightly younger and arguably more robust cousin, Dinosuchus, which we'll circle back to because comparisons are fun. For years, paleontologists were split on the function of this massive bony dome. Was it an adaptation for sound resonance, perhaps allowing the animal to create incredibly deep, rumbling calls that traveled miles through the dense swampy air? Was it an olfactory aid, enhancing its sense of smell to track terrestrial prey from hundreds of yards away? One discarded theory suggested it was a specialized air sac, allowing the Sarcosuchus to hold its breath for extraordinarily long periods while ambushing prey. Think of it as a built-in scuba tank. However, modern research, particularly a 2021 analysis of cranial sinuses by researchers at the University of Chicago, lean toward the idea that the bulla acted primarily as an enhanced sensory and display organ, perhaps playing a role in intraspecies communication or courtship displays, signaling to rivals, "I am bigger than you, do not enter my territory, I am the absolute unit here." Forget the serrated knife-like teeth of a theropod dinosaur, which are built for shearing flesh. Sarcosuchus's dental array was built for one thing and one thing only: holding on. Its jaws contained over 100 teeth, many of them large, conical, and slightly recurved. They were like heavy-duty railroad spikes, interlocking perfectly when the mouth snapped shut. Imagine you were trying to hold on to a terrified, struggling Ouranosaurus, a large 10-foot-tall herbivore with a sail on its back that was definitely roaming the same area.
You don't need to slice it. You need to anchor it. You need to puncture deep, shatter bone, and hold on until it drowns or bleeds out. A 2017 study modeling the bite force of Sarcosuchus, based on the robust nature of the skull and the massive muscle insertion points, estimated that it could deliver a bite force in the range of 18,000 pounds per square inch. For context, the biggest T-Rex bites peaked around 12,800 psi. Modern saltwater crocs hit maybe 3,700 psi. This means Sarcosuchus wasn't just biting prey, it was delivering the force equivalent of dropping a fully loaded Honda Civic onto a single point of impact. When that jaw clamped down, there was no escape. This was not a predator that waited for roadkill, it actively manufactured it. The armor, indestructible skin. Another critical component of its absolute dominance was its skin. Sarcosuchus was not some soft-bellied amphibian. Its entire dorsal surface, from the tip of its snout all the way down to the tail, was covered in thick, interlocking osteoderms. These plates were so dense and robust that they resembled heavy ceramic armor plating. Some of the recovered scutes are several inches thick. Why such heavy armor? Because in the Cretaceous, if you are not at the very top of the food chain, you are food. While many of the larger theropods in the Elras Formation, like Suchomimus, a large spinosaurid relative, were primarily piscivores, fish-eaters, there were still substantial threats. But more importantly, the armor allowed Sarcosuchus to hunt massive prey with less risk of injury. If a gigantic sauropod like Jobaria, also found in the same region, was stomping its way through the mud, a modern crocodile would be terrified.
Sarcosuchus could launch itself at the leg or flank of such an animal, knowing that if the prey panicked and kicked, its vital organs were protected by armor that would put a modern tank to shame. This thing was designed for sustained, close-quarters combat against targets exponentially larger than itself. Speaking of sustained, close-quarters combat, let's talk hunting strategy. The nightmare fuel hunt. The primary hunting technique of any large crocodilian is the ambush. Sarcosuchus perfected this dark art, turning the river margin into a literal kill zone. Its short, powerful legs meant it was not an efficient land predator, no sprint speeds here, but its powerful tail and dense bone structure made it a submerged torpedo. It would wait, often for hours, completely still, with only the bizarre bulla and perhaps the tops of its eyes visible above the muddy, slow-moving water.
When the prey, let's imagine an Tyrannosaurus, came close enough to dip its head for a drink, the action sequence began. The attack was not a chase, it was an explosion. Launching from the water using its massive tail as propulsion, Sarcosuchus would clamp onto the nearest limb or muzzle. Then came the horrifying trademark move, the death roll. The death roll is a rotational maneuver used by crocodilians to disorient, dismember, and drown large prey. In modern crocodilians, this move generates significant torsional force. Now scale that up to 8 tons. When Sarcosuchus began its death roll, it wasn't just spinning, it was operating like a giant rotating hydraulic press, twisting the limb, tendon, or torso of its victim with enough force to literally tear it apart. If the prey was a large terrestrial herbivore, the goal was simple: pull it into deeper water where the crocodiliform had the advantage.
Think about the biomechanics required to drag a 3 or 4 ton dinosaur. It requires incredible gripping power. Check, 100 conical teeth and 18,000 psi bite force, and massive musculature in the neck and tail. Sarcosuchus had both. The researchers who studied its vertebral column noted incredibly strong attachment points for massive neck muscles, suggesting that when it pulled, it was not merely relying on gravity, but actively using its immense bulk and muscular power to overcome the panicked struggle of its prey. The outcome was nearly always the same: RIP. The sheer size of Sarcosuchus also meant that it was likely an obligate ambush predator for life. Once you get that big, chasing small, agile prey is a waste of energy. It specialized in mega prey. While it certainly ate the giant fish and turtles found in the rivers, some fossil fish skeletons found nearby suggest lengths up to 10 feet. Its reputation rests on its ability to subdue dinosaurs.
Comparing the absolute units. When discussing giant crocodiliforms, there are always comparisons, especially to Deinosuchus, terror crocodile, the North American contemporary that lived millions of years later during the late Cretaceous. Deinosuchus was certainly a huge creature, perhaps hitting 35 feet and certainly targeting dinosaurs like Albertosaurus. But a 2016 comparative morphology study from the University of London suggested critical differences. Sarcosuchus had the elongated, narrow snout, the procumbent snout, typical of highly specialized fish and aquatic prey eaters, though it was massive enough to handle dinosaurs. Deinosuchus, on the other hand, had a broader, much flatter, and arguably more crushing snout, better suited for directly engaging large armored dinosaurs on land or shallow water.
In the world of paleontology, Sarcosuchus is sometimes viewed as the master of the aquatic ambush in the early Cretaceous rivers, while Deinosuchus was perhaps the master of the brackish estuarine megapredation later on. Both were terrifying, but Sarcosuchus holds the title for sheer length and pure specialized riverine terror in its era. And while Sarcosuchus was the undisputed lord of its river system, it shared the landscape with some other bizarre characters. The El Haz ecosystem. We are talking about a world brimming with life. The large herbivore population included Tyrannosaurus, famous for its sail-like neural spines, and the already mentioned Jobaria, a massive, long-necked sauropod. The constant flow of these animals provided the food source. But the rivers themselves were ecosystems of giants. Alongside Sarcosuchus swam massive coelacanths, huge freshwater sharks, and giant turtles, which provided the daily caloric needs for a growing croc.
The ecosystem was so rich and vast that multiple giant predators could coexist, each fulfilling a slightly different niche. Sarcosuchus, due to its size and armor, was firmly placed at the top of the food chain. It had no natural predator. Even the theropods like Suchomimus, which often weighed several tons, likely avoided a direct conflict with a mature Sarcosuchus, especially when it was in the water. A fight between the two would be a messy, dangerous proposition for both, but the croc had the unfair advantage of massive armor and an environment that favored its ambush tactics. This massive creature required a truly staggering caloric intake. Consider the physics. Supporting 10 metric tons of muscle and bone in a high-temperature environment requires constant fueling. While the massive fish population provided frequent meals, researchers hypothesized that the successful takedown of a large multi-ton dinosaur was essential for seasonal fat storage and to sustain the long periods of inactivity required for cold-blooded metabolism.
Every hunt was a calculation of energy output versus caloric gain, but when they struck, it was always the maximum possible impact. Speaking of intense energy output, hunting an 8-ton reptile is exhausting. Sometimes you need a little help to keep that focus razor sharp, whether you're stalking a prehistoric reptile or just trying to finish your quarterly report. That's why I rely on Paleo Fuel coffee. Paleo Fuel coffee is sourced from the ancient volcanic soils of South America, and it is so strong it could wake up a fossil. It's the only coffee guaranteed to give you the energy of a pack of velociraptors chasing a short king ornithopod.
The evolutionary journey and the short kings. Sarcosuchus is an example of a creature that evolved into maximum possible size within its architectural constraints. It belonged to a group of reptiles called the Phalidoridae, which are members of the wider Crocodiliiformes group. It is important for dino normies to remember that Sarcosuchus is not classified as a true crocodile, Eusuchia, which emerged later and includes all modern crocodilians, alligators, and caimans. Sarcosuchus represents an earlier, more ancient, and far more diverse radiation of the crocodile line. This line often produced bizarre, gigantic forms. Before Sarcosuchus, this group had various smaller, earlier forms, the short kings of the Crocodiliiforme world, that were maybe only 10 feet long.
The Sarcosuchus lineage shows us that the potential for gigantism was always baked into the reptilian architecture. All it needed was the right environment, a massive, resource-rich river system to unlock that potential. The persistence of the crocodiliform lineage throughout the Mesozoic is a testament to its evolutionary success. While many dinosaur groups rose and fell, the crocodilians kept adapting, proving that simplicity, the low-slung body, the ambush strategy, is often the key to long-term survival. Sarcosuchus was an evolutionary extreme, but the basic blueprint, low to the ground, heavily armored, massive jaws, proved unbeatable in aquatic settings for tens of millions of years. Even a nope rope couldn't handle this level of armor. The end of the emperor. So what happened to the emperor? Why don't we see 40-foot-long crocodiles today? The reign of Sarcosuchus Imperator, as brutal and absolute as it was, eventually came to an end.
Its extinction event was not the sudden impact of an asteroid, that was still 40 million years away, but a slower, more insidious change, environmental collapse. Sarcosuchus was highly specialized for those enormous, deep, stable river systems of the early Cretaceous African landscape. The fossil record shows a transition in the Middle Cretaceous, marked by geological changes that caused these massive river systems to begin drying out, fragmenting, and shrinking into smaller, more seasonal lakes and swamps. A creature that size requires massive, consistent deep water to effectively hunt and thermoregulate. Imagine an 8-ton absolute unit trying to hide in a shallow puddle. It simply couldn't. Its gigantism became its weakness. As the environment destabilized, its specialized size meant it couldn't adapt quickly enough, unlike its smaller, more generalized cousins who would eventually lead to modern crocodiles.
The shrinking habitat meant less water depth, fewer giant fish, and perhaps most importantly, greater competition for drinking spots amongst terrestrial dinosaurs, leading to more dangerous surface encounters for the crocodiliform. The specialized predator of megaprey was eventually starved out by the loss of its unique colossal habitat. R.I.P. Sarcosuchus. Its dynasty ended perhaps 100 million years ago, paving the way for the smaller, quicker, and more adaptable ancestors of the modern croc. The Lidicea Sarcosuchus is profound. It reminds us that during the age of dinosaurs, true terrestrial dominance was often challenged or even superseded by the masters of the aquatic world. It wasn't always the creatures standing tallest that were the scariest. Sometimes the greatest terror lay hidden just beneath the surface, waiting patiently.
Sarcosuchus wasn't just big, it was a perfect machine of Cretaceous carnage, a creature that ruled its domain absolutely, turning the fundamental necessity of water into the ultimate deadly trap. Thanks for watching, and until next time on The Lost World.